"We're not bringing the kids to see you. Hospitals are traumatizing." She said it so casually, like she was turning down brunch. It took me a second to realize I was still alive, still conscious, still clinging to the edge of recovery when my son's wife, Madison, said those words over speakerphone. Then I heard my son's voice, Eric, in the background. "Yeah, Mom, we just think it's better this way. They'll remember you how you were." How I was. I looked down at my body, barely functioning. A feeding tube, a line in my neck, a scar still fresh across my abdomen, and machines beeping like background noise to the shattering of my heart. I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because the anesthesia hadn't worn off completely. My jaw was slack, my body weak, but I heard every word, and they knew that. "My name is Lorraine, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a memory before you were even gone?" The phone call ended without a goodbye. I blinked, slow and heavy, unable to process the cold finality in my own son's voice. I wasn't even asking for much. I didn't expect balloons or a prayer circle. Just to see my grandkids. Just to feel like my life was still real to someone outside these four walls. The nurse came in right as the tears rolled silently. She didn't ask what happened. She just wiped them gently and whispered, "They don't deserve you." I wanted to believe her, but in that moment it felt like no one did. For weeks, I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember what I'd done wrong. Had I loved him too much? Too little? Was I too present? Or not enough? I remembered birthdays. Every single one. I remembered staying up all night with him when he had the flu. I remembered cashing out my retirement to help with their down payment. And now, they couldn't even bring the kids to say hello. They had already buried me, just not officially. I left the hospital after 11 weeks. No welcome home banners. No calls. No casseroles. Just silence. But sometimes silence is a gift. Because in it, you find the truth. You owe no one a second chance to discard you twice. Over the next few months, I didn't chase. I didn't beg to be included. I focused on getting stronger. My hands, once trembling, started writing again. My feet, once numb, began walking further than the living room. I changed my will. I changed my locks. And most importantly, I changed the name on my emergency contact form. From Eric Blake to Nurse Maribel Santiago. She had seen me cry. She had held my hand when the pain got unbearable. And she never once looked away from who I really was. 6 months passed. And then, on a cold Thursday morning, the phone rang. It wasn't Madison. It was the ER. "We have Eric Blake in critical condition. You're listed as the emergency contact." I cut her off, calm as a lake. "No, I'm not. Ma'am, the number is registered to you." "I know, but I'm not the name on the form anymore." Click. Some doors close with a bang, but the ones that matter, they close with clarity. That night, I made tea the way I always did, slow, methodical, with a hint of lavender. No shaking hands. No tears. Just silence, warm and steady. The kind of silence that used to terrify me when the house was full of noise and people and obligations. Now, it felt like peace. Because for once in my life, I didn't feel guilty for letting go. I didn't call back. Didn't follow up. Didn't even check the hospital's website to see if my son was okay. I knew that sounded cold, but let me ask you something. Where were they when I was hooked up to machines, unable to speak, praying for one familiar face to walk in? Where were they when the doctors said, I almost didn't make it? They were home, spending the money I helped them save, smiling in photos I wasn't invited to, teaching my grandchildren I was too sick to visit instead of teaching them what loyalty looks like. So no, I didn't return the call. I went for a walk, and as the wind hit my face, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The next day, Nurse Maribel texted me, "You okay? Heard from County R that they called you by mistake." "I'm more than okay," I wrote back. "I'm free." 2 days later, the knock came. I opened the door, and there stood Madison. No makeup, eyes red, Clothes wrinkled, like she'd slept in the car. She didn't even say hello. "He's in surgery again," she blurted. "They said you were listed as the emergency contact, but then you hung up." I didn't invite her in.
Yes.
I hung up. She blinked, like it was news that her actions had consequences.
Why?
"He's your son. And I was his mother when it mattered," I said, voice steady. "When I needed him, he was too busy protecting your comfort. He let you erase me." She stepped forward. "The kids miss you." I smiled, but not the kind that welcomes.
No.
"They miss the benefits." She stood there, stunned. So I continued. "I paid for the violin lessons, the summer camps. I mailed birthday gifts I never got thank yous for. You cashed the checks, Madison. You just never remembered who signed them. We thought."
No.
You decided. You decided that a hospital room was too much for your children, but you had no issue letting me cook Easter dinner on pain meds 6 months earlier." She looked down. The silence grew thick between us. Then I asked her the one thing I never thought I would. "Why did you hate me so much?" She didn't deny it. Didn't even try. "Because you always made him look small. You were the strong one. He never knew how to be a man around you." I stood there, stunned, then laughed. Not loud. Just one breath. "I made him look small by surviving?" She had no answer. Because truth doesn't need to yell. It just stands. I closed the door. Slowly. No slam. No scene. And, on the fridge behind me, a new sticky note, this time, written by me. "Peace isn't petty. It's earned." That was the last time she came to my door. Because eventually people learn. The ones they thought would always be there are the ones they should have never tested. The first time I walked back into the community center after my recovery, I half expected people to stare, to whisper, to pity. But instead, I got applause. Not loud, not performative, just quiet nods, soft claps, and hands over hearts. Mrs. Jefferson, who ran the food pantry, gave me a long hug. "You're back," she whispered. "We didn't think you'd make it. But look at you, walking like the wind didn't even touch you." I smiled. The wind hit hard. I just didn't fall. I had volunteered there for years, before the surgery, before the betrayal, before the silence that tried to convince me I was disposable. But now I was back. Not to escape my pain. To build something out of it. I started hosting quiet meetups for women like me, older women who had given everything to their families and gotten nothing back, but polite neglect. We called it the second circle. Because that's what we were, not the first call, not the first choice, but the ones who still showed up when everyone else vanished. One Tuesday, a woman named Bernice stood up. She'd been a nurse for 30 years. Raised 4 kids. Now lived alone on cat food and pension dust. They visit when they want something. And when I say no, suddenly they need space. I gave birth to space. The whole room laughed. But under it, we all knew the ache. We didn't need revenge. We needed restoration. And I was starting to feel it. In my bones. In my mornings. In the way I no longer reached for my phone hoping my son had texted. Because I had stopped needing crumbs. But the universe? It has a way of circling back. A month later, I got another call from the hospital. But this time it wasn't from them. It was a nurse I knew. One who'd seen me during my stay. "Lorraine, I know you're not on the contact list anymore, but your son's kids are here."
Yar.
Madison left them in the waiting room and disappeared. "What happened?" "Car accident. He's stable." She panicked. Took off. I felt nothing at first. No fury. No fire. Just the kind of heavy silence you feel when life offers you a test, again. I drove there quietly. When I walked into the ER lobby, the 2 kids, Caleb and Lila, looked up. They didn't recognize me at first. But then Lila stood. "Grandma?" I hadn't heard that word in so long, it almost hurt. I sat beside them, wrapped them both in my arms. And for a second, all the anger in the world went quiet. Not because I forgave, but because I remembered. Remembered that no matter how much their parents failed me, they hadn't. Eric was unconscious when I peeked into his room. machines humming, oxygen tube in. Just like me, 6 months ago. Only this time, I was standing. He wasn't. Madison was nowhere to be found. The nurses said she screamed something about not being built for this and ran. The kids had no one else. So I called child services. I explained everything, calmly, clearly, with dates and documents and the emergency contact history to back it up. They asked if I was willing to take the children temporarily. Not temporarily, I said. I'll do it right. As I signed the forms, I felt something shift. Not power. Not revenge. Ownership. Of my worth. Of my name. Of a future they thought they had written without me. They thought they'd erased me. But I wasn't gone. I was just recovering.
And now,
I was writing the next chapter, with my own pen. 2 toothbrushes. A SpongeBob nightlight. 1 worn teddy bear, missing an eye. That's what the kids arrived with. No coats. No school supplies. No apology. Just fear in their little eyes and a silent question I could feel before they spoke it. Are we safe now? I nodded. You're home. Not the house they left. Not the cold, white walls of the hospital. Not the mess Madison ran from. Here. With me. They were home. I had no intention of raising children again in my 60s. My knees ached on cold mornings. My hands weren't as quick. But that night, I reheated leftover soup, tucked them in, and read stories I hadn't opened in decades. Lila fell asleep mid-sentence, hand curled around mine. Caleb didn't speak much. But before he closed his eyes, he whispered, I didn't want to leave you, Grandma. Mommy said you were too sad. Too sad?
no.
I was too aware. Too awake to their manipulations. Too steady to be shattered twice. The next morning, I did what I always do when the world tries to fold me. I stood taller. We went to the store. Bought clothes that fit. School shoes. Notebooks with their favorite cartoon characters. Snacks that didn't expire 6 months ago. And when the school counselor called to ask if I was capable of full guardianship, I sent over bank statements, a notarized document, and a sharply worded letter from my lawyer. I wasn't deemed unfit when I was paying for their private preschool and dance lessons. Don't try now. They didn't ask again. On the 3rd day, the hospital called. Eric had woken up. He's asking for you. I stared at the phone. My hands didn't tremble. Tell him I hope he recovers fully. But I'm not coming. Would you like to leave a message? I paused. Yes. I cleared my throat. Tell him the kids are safe. And tell him I signed the custody forms this time.
Click.
That night, Lila and I were brushing our teeth together when she asked, Is Daddy mad at you? I looked in the mirror. At my own face. The same one that raised a boy who turned cold. The same eyes that watched him disappear when I needed warmth most. I don't think he knows how to be mad at the right people, I said. But maybe one day he'll learn. She rinsed her mouth and said, He should be mad at Mommy. She threw away my birthday card from you. I froze. What? I saw it in the trash. The one with the butterfly sticker. You always do that.
I did.
Every single year. And every single year, they told me. It probably got lost in the mail. Now I knew the truth. I waited until they slept. Then I opened my box of keepsakes. Letters returned unopened. Photos never acknowledged. Little signs I had ignored for years, calling it miscommunication, bad timing, anything but what it truly was. Erasure. So I lit a candle. Not to mourn. To mark it. The night I stopped chasing love from people who only knew how to take. The night I stopped trying to remind them who I was. Because from now on, I'd let my presence remind them. Let my protection of those kids remind them. Let my joy, my unshaken, unapologetic joy remind them. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something they never expected. A life that didn't need their permission. A week after I took full custody of the kids, an envelope arrived. Hand-delivered. Cream-colored. Embossed. Gold lettering. I thought it was spam, some catalog or fundraiser. But when I opened it, my breath caught. It was a formal invitation to Madison's baby shower. hosted at a country club I had once helped them join with a temporary loan they never paid back. There was no personal note. No, we'd love to see you. Just a line at the bottom. Registry link included. Diapers preferred. I blinked. Not from pain. From disbelief. That night, I made a decision. Not petty. Not impulsive. Just accurate. I pulled out my calendar and marked a date. Not for the shower. For something else. Over the next few weeks, I planned something behind the scenes. Quietly. Efficiently. Like all the best strategies. I invited a few close friends. Made a reservation at a venue I adored. The art museum downtown. The one they never wanted to visit because culture doesn't make money. I ordered cupcakes with butterfly toppers. Just like the stickers Madison used to throw in the trash. I didn't plan a party. I planned a reveal. When the day came, I dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn since before the surgery. Strong lines. Clean buttons. Not glamorous. Just powerful. Caleb and Lila walked in wearing matching cardigans. They looked safe. Not guarded. Not unsure. Just like kids again. The room had photographers. Local press. A few city officials.
Why?
Because that week, I had officially launched the Second Circle Foundation for women over 55 who had been financially used, emotionally neglected, or abandoned by their adult children. We provided legal aid, housing, mental health resources, and free childcare, because guess who always gets stuck raising the next generation? At the podium, I cleared my throat and said, some of us were told we were too old, too emotional, too irrelevant. But we were never too late. We were simply on time for something different. And to the ones who left us behind, may you remember, one day, that the woman you dismissed is the reason your children still have a soft place to land. People clapped. Lila clapped loudest. Madison found out 2 days later.
How?
The press release. The full-page article in the Sunday paper. Headline: ICU survivor builds network for forgotten mothers. Her text came fast.
Wow.
You really made yourself the victim, huh? I didn't reply. Then another. Eric wants to see the kids. You don't get to cut us out. This time, I answered. You cut yourselves out. I just stopped handing you scissors. The next morning, I received an email from a lawyer. Eric had filed for partial custody. Not for love. For control. He wanted to reassert himself now that I had built something solid. Now that my name was back in the public eye, and not as a sick old woman but as a leader. What he didn't know. I had receipts. Years of negligence. Messages. Witness statements. A signed affidavit from my doctor confirming I had no visitors during recovery. And more than that, I had time. I wasn't weak anymore. I wasn't alone. I sat with my attorney, calmly sipping lemon water, while we built a case that would make it impossible for him to reclaim what he willingly gave up. Do you want to crush them? She asked. No, I said. I just wanted on record that I stood. And they didn't. Because sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you must rise so high that the people who abandoned you can't even reach your shadow. Eric arrived late to the custody hearing. Unshaven. Dull-eyed. Wearing a wrinkled suit like someone else picked it off a clearance rack and told him it looked respectable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. But that didn't matter. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to close a chapter. Lila clutched my hand outside the courtroom. Will they make us go back? I knelt to her level, brushed a loose curl behind her ear. They'll hear the truth today. Not just from me, but from the people who were watching even when you thought no one was. She looked at me like I was 10 feet tall. Inside, the judge adjusted his glasses and began. Eric's lawyer tried to paint a narrative, emotional decisions, temporary stress, a father eager to reconnect. But when it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I just submitted the documents. The emergency contact form signed months before. The proof Madison fled the ER leaving minors unattended. The school counselor's note about neglect. And finally, a video. Lila's birthday. Last year. The one where Madison laughed off her request to call Grandma. Lila had recorded it. She's not coming. She never does, Madison said with a shrug. Grandma lives in the past. Then the video showed Lila quietly opening the card I'd sent. The one with the butterfly sticker. The one Madison ripped up 5 seconds later. The judge's eyes hardened. That was not the behavior of someone with a child's best interests at heart. Eric tried to speak. Choked up. Looked at me like I was the traitor. But I stayed calm. You weren't absent because you were sick. Or struggling. You were absent because you chose not to show up, over and over. That's not parenting. That's pattern. He said nothing. Because truth doesn't beg to be heard.
It stands.
The final ruling was short. Full permanent guardianship awarded to Lorraine Green. Visitation only with court approval and professional supervision. Case closed.
Case closed.
But that wasn't the most powerful part. As we stood to leave, Eric mumbled, almost under his breath, but just loud enough. You really think they'll love you more? I didn't turn around. I just said,
no.
But they'll feel safe with me. And that's better than love built on fear. Outside, reporters were waiting. Somehow, the press had picked up the foundation story and tied it to the hearing. I didn't stop to give statements. But one reporter asked as I walked past, what would you say to mothers who feel forgotten by the children they raised? I paused, looked straight into the camera. Don't beg for a seat at a table that collapses without you. Build your own. That night, I didn't celebrate. I cooked grilled cheese and tomato soup. Caleb did his homework at the table. Lila drew a butterfly and taped it to the fridge. It said, Grandma's house equals home. I cried in the hallway, but not from sadness. From the kind of peace that only comes when you've finally broken a generational chain. Eric didn't call again. Neither did Madison. They disappeared the way people do, when shame outpaces pride. But I wasn't waiting for an apology. I had the kids. I had my purpose. And I had something no court or contract could measure. The quiet triumph of being trusted again. The first time Lila called me Mom by accident, we were in line at the grocery store. She froze, eyes wide, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. I squeezed her hand. It's okay, sweetheart. I heard what you meant, and I meant it, because by then, she was my daughter in every way that mattered. That weekend, Caleb brought home a family tree project. He laid it out on the kitchen table, crayons and glue scattered everywhere. Do I put Dad's name here? He asked, pointing to the top branch. I hesitated, then said, that's up to you. But why don't we add the people who show up? He nodded slowly and wrote, Lorraine, right at the root. A few months later, we had our first proper vacation, just the 3 of us. A cabin near a lake. No phones. No noise. Just board games, campfires, and laughter I hadn't heard in years. At night, I'd sit on the porch while they slept, watching stars. And every time I exhaled, it felt like letting go of years of disappointment, breath by breath. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the healing was louder. Then came the email. From a private prep school I couldn't afford when Eric was young. They'd seen the article about the foundation, about my story. They were offering both Caleb and Lila full scholarships. We believe in second circles, the principal wrote. I read it 3 times. And then just whispered, God, you don't miss a beat, do you? At orientation, other parents stared. Older woman. 2 young kids. People assumed. Whispered.
Judged.
One woman asked me if I was the nanny. I smiled.
No.
Just the woman who showed up when everyone else vanished. She didn't ask again. Life didn't suddenly get perfect. Caleb had nightmares. Lila asked hard questions. There were bills, lawyer updates, and days when I still missed the version of Eric who used to hold my hand crossing the street. But every night, before bed, the kids said, Good night, Grandma. Thank you. Not just for the meals, or the roof, for everything. One evening, I sat with Lila brushing her hair. She looked at me in the mirror and asked, Do you think Daddy ever loved us? I paused, then said, I think he loved what made him comfortable. But love that disappears when it's hard isn't really love. It's convenience. She nodded slowly. Then I'm glad we live with you. The next morning, the kid surprised me. A card on my pillow. Drawings.
Glitter.
Stickers. Messy handwriting. It read, "Happy Mother's Day to the woman who became everything." And on the back, "You didn't just rescue us. You chose us. That means more." I cried in the bathroom.
Hard.
Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's afterthought. I felt like someone's answer. Later that day, I sat with a board member of the foundation. We were planning our next expansion, a second circle chapter in 3 new cities. She smiled and said, "I don't know how you do it all." And I looked out the window at Caleb racing through the yard, Lila giggling behind him with sidewalk chalk in her hands. Then I said, "Because once I was alone in a hospital bed, forgotten. And now I'm someone's home." That's what legacy is. Not money. Not names and lights. Legacy is who remembers your arms when the world feels too heavy. And who runs to you when their soul needs rest. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was becoming the place where healing begins. 1 year later, the foundation's new wing opened, a renovated brownstone in the heart of the city. It had 6 bedrooms, a rooftop garden, a community kitchen, and a counseling suite painted in warm colors and lined with storybooks. Above the entrance, carved into dark oak and gold-leafed by hand, were 5 simple words. The Lorraine Green Second Circle. I stood there that morning, holding Caleb's hand. Lila twirled in her new yellow dress beside me. The press had gathered. Cameras clicked. But none of that compared to the quiet in my chest. The quiet that comes when your entire life has been screaming, and finally, it's not anymore. Caleb whispered, "That's your name, Grandma." I nodded. "It is." He asked, "How does it feel?" I smiled. Like I didn't just survive the fire. I rebuilt the house. Inside, women found comfort. Grandmothers. Aunties. Caretakers. So many who were left behind by the people they raised, now raising something new. I wasn't the only one. One woman, Miriam, said, "They stopped calling me Mom, so I called myself whole." Another, Sandra. I kept giving them chances until I realized I was handing over pieces of myself. We weren't bitter. We were brilliant. We weren't angry. We were awakened. One afternoon, I got a call from a number I hadn't saved. It was Eric. "I saw the article," he said, voice quieter than I remembered. "Good. The kids look happy." "They are." Silence. "Do they ask about me?" I told the truth. Sometimes. I never lie to them. I just remind them who stayed.
He didn't argue.
"Just one last question. Is there any space left for me?" I took a breath and said, "Not at this table. But I hope one day you build your own and treat people better at it than you did at mine." Then I hung up. Weeks passed. The foundation thrived. One day, Caleb stood in front of his class and gave a presentation. Topic: My hero. He didn't choose a firefighter or a superhero.
He pointed at me.
My grandma saved me twice. First when I was born. Second when I needed someone to believe in me again. The teacher teared up. I did too. Because that was the kind of story I had once begged to be a part of. And now, I was the whole chapter. Lila drew me a portrait for my birthday. A woman with silver hair and a golden crown. But instead of jewels, the crown had keys. "Why keys?" I asked. "Because you unlocked everything," she said. I used to sit in the dark waiting for a phone call, a text, a knock at the door from the family I sacrificed everything for.
But now?
I sit in a sunlit room where women laugh, where children play, where peace lives and doesn't feel borrowed. They once left me in silence, forgotten in a sterile hospital, erased from the pages I helped write. But I rose. I redefined what family meant. And now, when people walk through those doors, they don't see a victim. They see a woman who refused to disappear. A woman who wrote her own ending. and made it a beginning for others.